guess what, guys? Millions of people are already tuned in.
Beautiful. Yeah, awesome.
Okay, well, hi, welcome everyone. I am beyond excited for this segment of Visions, which is the show on Bella Vista focused specifically on community building. So we're every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Subscribe to Bella V TV on YouTube or check us out on Facebook Live at Bella Vista Cafe and Social Club. I have with me here today 4 very special guests. I'm going to let them introduce each other, actually, because they all have a really special relationship, which we're going to get into as we talk about how we build communities. Today's show, we're going to talk about how the communities build us as much as we build them, as we look at 4 people whose lives not only are intertwined together, but have defined the work that they've chosen to do in who they've chosen to be in the world. So with that, Amanda, why don't you kick us off with introducing these special guests that you have with us today?
Oh, I'm already tearing up. So again, thank you guys. It's been a wild journey launching Bella V TV, and I've always loved connecting people, and this week's really special because we are highlighting all the kids that I grew up with in this amazing town called Alameda, and also just the Bay Area in general. And I think you nailed it. It was, for me, yesterday, people were asking, what is it that you miss about Alameda? And I said, community. And once you leave Alameda, you are searching the rest of your life for that community. And I couldn't find it, so I actually went out and I built my own community through my cafe. And today we're here with John Gordon and Niloy Gangopadhyay, right? So these are 2 of my best friends from high school. And I think it's going to be amazing to find out what you guys really do, right? Because we see each other on Facebook, we stay in contact. We went to our 20th year reunion. And that wasn't even this past summer. But I think it's just going to be amazing to see how many lives you've touched since leaving St. Joe's. And I'm sure we'll get some juicy stories in the mix as well. So for those of you that haven't been tuning in, St. Joseph Notre Dame High School is the 2nd most diverse high school in, is it California or the nation?
I would love to go nation, but it's California.
Yeah. Well, fake news. We can throw some fake news in there. But I think it's always been a challenge to describe to people what it's like to grow up in a diverse environment that has such a strong community with shared value system. So who wants to take it away? Do we Rochambeau between Niloy and John, or what do you think?
I actually, if I may, I'm going to tee up my friend Niloy because off camera he kind of said something that I just think is so cool. But I also just want to acknowledge the fact that my friend also rarely does himself justice when he introduces himself. So Niloy, along with just being one of the most smartest, outspoken, articulate guys that we were around in high school, and it was just kind of surprising it was confusing almost. Niloy went along after college at Berkeley, went to Harvard to teach for America. He founded and started this incredible school in New Orleans for, I think you were there for like a decade, and is now doing some amazing work in Texas. This guy he's taken this dizzying intellect that has always kind of been a gift and worked at it, which is really impressive. And has turned it into kind of a career of helping other people and giving a voice to folks that don't have it. And so it's just been, I'm really excited to be able to chat with you about this, my dear friend. And with that, I would love for you to hear what my friend thinks about that question.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce John, who actually needs an introduction. I think that John has many qualities and characteristics that draw people to him. He's one of the few people I could think about from our high school that was able to sort of slide in and out of groups, right? Folks that were thespians, folks that were really into sports. John is in the St. Joe Sports Hall of Fame, and we're in one of the best high schools in Northern California. So he played baseball, he played soccer, he played basketball. Not only played it, he played it well. You got to check out the YouTube clip that St. Joe's has done on his Hall of Fame commemoration. But beyond that, he's just like a sweet, nice guy, man. I mean, the like to not like factor is, the ratio is out of this park, man. Like, folks love John. And like I was saying before, he could slide into groups, Asian American, Latino, Black, white, and all different folks. And it's pretty early on in high school when you're getting, I think, 180 freshman class with like 27 feeder schools, right? And John was able to do that and build lasting relationships. And so he went on to do really great things at St. Mary's. I actually ran into John twice when he was working at Challenge Day, where he was doing thousands of workshops to all different stakeholders. And then now, I believe, I want to make sure that I get it right, is a partner at Human Side and co-founder of Peace Project. And I really can't say enough about John having a kind soul and how that has played into the part that I've known him for 28 years. I ran into him twice at the airport, once at Oakland and once at Midway in Chicago. And we might have talked for like 7 minutes, but in the moment, like John had, like, it felt like 3 hours, right? He was asking the right questions and he was responding. And also his memory, he was archiving, he had archived a ton of information from before, and it was really good and really powerful to see. So I'm thankful to be on the call with you, John, and Amanda and Mr. Gerson. It's awesome. It feels like home. So I think to your point about community, the C in there is comfort, and this call, I'm super excited, looking forward to it. So appreciative of the opportunity to get on here today.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for kicking it off in that way. I think that one of the things we want to show here is that the biggest characteristic of this group of people who've come together is like a deep appreciation of each other and really seeing each other for who they are. And that's something I want to explore a little bit more. So for people who haven't seen any of the other segments or don't know about the school in Alameda that they're talking about, St. Joe's had a really distinct approach, which was really providing deliberate diversity, right? So they'll talk a little bit about it more, but 25% Latino, 25% African American, 25% white, 25% Asian from the whole region roundabout, and bringing that group together in a relatively small group setting. And I think that what I'm hearing in the conversations of the four of you, it seems like there were two formative experiences during that time and places, specific geographic places that provided that sense of community. Number one, this intention school. And I want to explore how that maybe shaped some of your views of how you interact in the world, knowing number one, that the school was intentional in creating that environment. But number two, being a kid and taking that for granted and it just being the world that you're in, and how that shaped how you launched into the real world that wasn't as intentional. Number two, since we have Mr. Gerson here, being able to talk about the home that he provided and the physical space that was, and how that also shaped Amanda and the work that she's done in the Bella V, and again with the Bella V TV and all her work in creating a community of like-minded, and in this case, like-hearted people, it seems like, everyone from jocks to theater students to book nerds and everyone in between, to come to this house and feel welcome, to feel a part of it, and to always feel invited, and how that might have shaped how you define inclusion, right? So that's like a lot. That's basically everything I want to talk about today. But as we sit here, I just want to give some background for people to understand that it wasn't just the school that brought these four beautiful hearts together, but it was also Amanda's home, right? And thinking about that in terms of what it really means to do heartfelt, inclusive work, right? So, John, you had a really great story of kind of being in the house and going through. Would you mind just kind of talking about what was that like, and how, because that was not an experience I had, right? In Orange County, you didn't just show up at a friend's house. Like, you were definitely going to get booted to the porch if you did that.
Yes, thank you for this. And I was gonna shoehorn my way in if you didn't toss it to me. So I'm really appreciative that you did. But it's very telling to me, right, Amanda, that we've been able to do, this whole section on like Alameda and your life. Granted, I'm from San Leandro world. I just want to out myself. It was close to Alameda. I went to high school there, but I was like the outsider that they let hang out. There was a way that was actually even more helpful for me, because I didn't live in Alameda. And so being kind of welcomed into a place and having some places, I was waiting between class and practice of like, what am I going to do? There was almost very quickly, there was a way that it was like, oh, we can stop by the Gersons. We're welcome there. And that was even in my adolescent, just ridiculous 14, 15-year-old self, like hormonal Olympics and the whole world revolved around me, just like identity crisis that was. I realized that was a rare thing. And it's not surprising, Amanda, that there are so many people who are willing to come back and do this and like excited about it. And a lot of that has to do with you, Amanda, and you, Mr. Gerson and Miss Gerson, in the ways that you were an example for us in a way that we didn't even know was possible. And what I specifically was telling Lauren about is that it was my JV basketball team, and there were like 6 of us, and Amanda was at practice or something herself. And so she wasn't there, but we knew that we could go to your house. And so we showed up. And so it was a bunch of dudes, a lot of different folk, right? There were 4 African-American dudes, me and 1 Mexican guy, and we were all hanging out in your house with nobody there. And we had helped ourselves to the fridge. We're just kind of lounging, and you kind of came in the side door, and somebody came up from the basement, and in today's world, things are really, really hot right now, and it's worth acknowledging that there was a 6-foot big African-American man who came up through the basement while nobody else was there. And your response was, "Hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. Good to see you. You're welcome here." And that is something that I didn't know how big a deal that was until I got a lot older. So thank you.
Oh, you're going to make it talk.
Hotel Gerson.
Yeah. Just to explain kind of my background, my parents raised 6 kids. We didn't have a lot of money. We worked at a restaurant. They opened a restaurant in the 50s. All 6 kids worked there with mom and dad. They had a fish market, a poultry market, a little bar. And that was our social hub. My parents went to work at 7 a.m, came home at midnight, and they were alcoholics. And I was a point guard for St. Joe's in 66 and 67. I was actually the first basketball player to set foot on the court in 1966 because we lined up by height, and I was the shortest. So I'm gonna go with that. But yeah, that was. But what happened was in my senior year, I won an award, which was a scholar athlete. Mm-hmm. And my dad never went to any of my games. And when they went to this award night, both parents just broke down and cried. And my brother and I ran a jazz club in the Oakland Hills. We took over for our parents, and we had live jazz 6 years, ran a business. I worked in the morning for Bart. And I promised myself and my wife that.
Where's that beer? We need that beer. It's okay, Dad. There's only 1 million people watching live across the nation.
This is why I'm going to receive the Academy Award. I promised myself and my wife that we would go all in with the kids. So she started the lunch program at St. Joe's, ran it for 11 years. Laporte asked me to coach girls basketball. I don't know why. Stuck with that for 3 years. Coached my baseball in the summer. Substitute teacher. Did a lot of different things. And I was just all in. And I grew up, with a community, although it wasn't at the home, it was at the business.
In the boys club.
And you could run anywhere in Alameda. You could go anywhere. And I was a boys club rat, played CYO ball, and we had a great park system. Park system was a T-shirt league with basketball, baseball, and football. So it was wonderful for me for sports. And just in St. Joe's for me was like three different periods. One was when I went to school, and the girls, it was an all-girls school and an all-boys school. And then I went to St. Mary's College. I was a gal. I played freshman basketball. And it was an all-boys school. And I left after my sophomore year. That year, Summer of Love, 1969, I went down to Mexico and spent 12 weeks. Went to a school through USF, went to summer school in Mexico, in Guadalajara. And then when I came back, I had transferred schools to San Diego State and became an Aztec. And I finished up at San Diego State. And I knew right away I wanted to be a teacher because my role models were teachers and coaches. And that's the direction I took.
Well, and it seems like you took that direction not just in the confines of that institution, but really taking on a role of teacher, mentor, coach in your personal life too. And I think that you're seeing three people whose lives were touched by that. You know, as you're talking through, what I'm seeing here is multiple generations of this community building, right? And it's a seed I think that you helped to plant. You're talking about your parents' involvement, the 6 kids. I come from a family of 7. I know what it's like to have a house of people just constantly coming in and out. And that's something that I try to always keep in my home. And I see how you instilled that in Amanda, who's turned the cafe really into an extension of her home, right? The Bella Vista has that heart, has that home. It's the place you can always go. It's more your spot than it is a restaurant, right?
Yes.
And how that seeded itself in Amanda. And you look at the work that John and Niloy have done, and interesting that both of them have pursued serving those communities in education. So with the Peace Project that you're working on, John, creating, I love how on the website it talks about like everyone feels like they have a place, right? And as you were talking about those in-between times between practice and school, you know, there's been so many studies, and I'm sure Niloy, I can spell these better than I can, but so many studies about those in-between times for kids are the hardest. That's the time when they're most vulnerable, both vulnerable in like that beautiful way of vulnerability, of being open to being taught, of being open to being mentored, of being open to build bonds and friendships and growth, and vulnerable to prey, right? To predatory practices, to bad influences, to falling into the darkest of their own insecurities, right? And how you, John, seem to really be striving to make sure everyone has that place on a college campus, right? And I'd love to explore what that's like for you, and if you're aware of that, you know, and if you bring any of that into your consulting work on the human side, which is creating a mental and emotional capacity in a physical space that we all have to be, which is work, right? You don't get to choose the dynamics there, but you do get to shape them, you know, and Niloy, I think it's very telling that you spent so much of your focus developing similar programs that seem to have given you access to the future, the education, and maybe a lot of the person that you've become. And I hope that's not presumptuous, but just from John's description, seeing how much you took advantage of the foundation that your parents afforded you and letting you go to St. Joe's. So with that, I'd love to just kind of explore what were those seeds and how did they grow into such interesting and beautiful fruit in you guys. Niloy, as you talk through, what was that experience of being part of St. Joe's? Were you aware of that? And did that shape some of the work that you did both in New Orleans, working in those schools? And does it shape what you're bringing now in Texas?
Oh, definitely. Before we went on air, I was telling John, Mr. Gerson, and Amanda that, you know, I grew up in Alameda, K-8, relatively strong public schools. And so my parents made the decision to send me to St. Joe's. And that was like the summer School Ties came out, right? So I'm a practicing Hindu. And actually, fast forward to the first day of homeroom, like, you know, we're doing a prayer, and Amanda, like, it was because Gangopadhyay Gerson, so she was right behind me. She like tapped me on the shoulder. She was like, you're not doing it right. And I'm like, oh, geez. School ties had come out, right? So I was
Calling you on prayer. Oh my God.
I was like, oh man, I'm gonna get outed. Like they're like school ties, like when Brendan Fraser was I was like, oh my God, they're gonna know that I'm a practicing Hindu. Oh God, what's gonna happen? Nothing happened. It wasn't a big deal. But she was like, you're doing it wrong. It looked like I was on the baseball field. It was just awkward, right?
Let me show you how to pray.
So moving forward, day one, the remainder of the next 3.97 years, I did not do the sign of the cross. All that to say, like, it's interesting, right? Whereas K-8 in Alameda at the time, so like in the mid 80s to early 90s, like in my feeder elementary school, my feeder middle school that worked on Alameda High, not diverse at all. We probably had a handful of students of color, and that's like predominantly Asian, a handful of Latinos, and like I count the black folks I went to school with in elementary, middle school in one hand, right? Not even using all my fingers. Then you go to a school like St. Joe's where you're getting people, it's a commuter school, right? So you're getting folks from all over, as far as even like Tracy, where parents believe in this college preparatory, believe in the parochial education, and through means of, in some capacity, are getting there, right? And so we have a significant portion of students who are on scholarship, but that was my first exposure to diversity at scale. So when I played soccer, we might be playing a school in Oakland, but I'm not like interacting outside of 90 minutes and then shaking their hands, eating some oranges and going off. Right? I might go to the mall, I might see folks of color, but it's nothing like being in high school like that. And so I think it was powerful in the work that I do now. And then not only that, I think, I don't know the current position. My little sister graduated from there 15 years later, but like I think St. Joe's was able to offer financial assistance to a variety of folks, right? And so you had students who are low income, mid income, high income, and it was a beautiful thing, right? To understand the difference in class and race, embrace the difference in cultures implicitly. I'm not sure, as much as I love the school, that we did enough explicitly. And Amanda and I were exchanging some texts, like we could have definitely done a whole lot more to understand. But like Lauren, you were mentioning, we were growing up in the 90s where whether it was the music, whether it was movies, the culture made it seem like we were getting along much further, even though the Rodney King riots in LA had just happened 3 years after. So my first exposure and spending some time with people outside of Alameda, whether it's socially in Oakland, on the evenings, like going to parties, just having dialogue and discussion about understanding in a place in Alameda where coming from privilege, not necessarily based on skin color, even though that was there, it was more so like family homes, right? Like when Mr. Gerson is describing the story of his mom and dad showing up at the very end, Mr. Gerson is going to all the games. My parents came to every activity, Little League and Babe Ruth and soccer, and that's like Alameda at its core, right? And so all of a sudden, going to a place where that's not the place. And so it planted the seeds of this idea about justice, right? Really early on. It planted the seeds about diversity. It planted the seeds around this idea about being sound and present mentally, physically, and emotionally. So we had these retreats, right? So like your first year, you have like a 1-day retreat for like 6 hours. Then it's like 7 hours the second year. Third year, it's like overnight for one night. Then they get you back on the bus. Then we have this retreat called Kairos. And I know John was leader, Amanda, you might've been a leader, super powerful and intentional, right? And so it was an interesting experience, right? I remember one anecdote that I'd like to share is it was everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but people old enough will remember the summer of '94, partly because it was like O.J. Simpson, the white Bronco, right? It wasn't until almost a year later, our senior year, that the trial, right, where he was acquitted came out. And I remember not understanding the complexity, but it seemed like so many of our black classmates, like I remember I was in a room with a teacher, predominantly classroom with black students, and folks cheered, right? And I cheered as well. And I didn't understand at the time because I hadn't lived the life that they had in experiencing sort of like issues with law enforcement at an early age, right? It's like what that particular acquittal actually meant. So I think about, I want to be able to create equitable schools and a system, right, for those of us that grew up K through 12, whether you went to public or parochial schools in the Bay Area, they're solid schools, right, that give us an opportunity to be on a Zoom 24 years later talking about our careers. Yeah. And I think too often you have disenfranchised folks, disproportionately people of color, blacks and Latinos, I would say, predominantly blacks, that are not getting those opportunities. And so my parents were able to afford to send me to St. Joe's, which then opened up the floodgates for opportunity after opportunity that then I took advantage of. But I really want to ensure the success, and I think of all individuals. And so I think a lot of who I am today, my ability to build consensus, like what I was alluding to that John has the power to do, has a lot to do with the peers and friendships that I developed and just the exposure, right? Like, you know, I showed pictures recently at work. People were showing me pictures of their high school reunion, and I showed them a picture, and they were like, "Whoa, your school is like, it's like the United Colors of Benetton ad. Like, it's super diverse." Real talk, like even within the public schools in the Bay Area, they're a homogeneous population, right? Mm-hmm. Anyways, all that to say, like, I'm super thankful that my family sent me there for the 4 years, and you know, and I think it has a lot to do with who I am today and the work that I chose to do.
You said one thing that I'd really like to explore a little bit more. I mean, that was so much. That was essentially like Niloy's heart and vision, foundational for all that he does and has pillared up. But you talked about justice and how it gave you a sense of justice. Can you unpack that? Because it's not like you shared stories where it was like, I saw this thing happen and this led to justice. And how it seems like for you, like diversity and opportunity of access seem to be tied into your vision of justice. What does that mean? And how does that play out in the work that you're doing in schools right now?
So I think in terms of the work that I do currently for the state of Texas, so I manage our work with our English learners, which is 20% of the state of Texas, students who are experiencing homelessness, students who are in foster care, human trafficking, pregnancy related, groups, right? So the most vulnerable and at risk, like that's a definition from the Federal Department of Education. And so a lot
of them already in risk, right?
Yeah. So basically like you could be academically behind and then all the indicators I listed above put you, and then obviously students with disabilities, right? Yeah. And so my work there is at a systems level to ensure that students are getting the services that they need, right? Yeah. But that's like adequate. It's not necessarily equitable. I think the work that I'm mostly connected with in this idea about community in New Orleans was like, I think that, so you'll notice in the Mr. Gordon anecdote and like John talking, Amanda talking, like a lot of extracurricular activities, right? So like we're talking about the play, we're talking about sports, right? Robust opportunities, right? We're talking about speech and debate. We're talking about a community service requirement that they provided for us, right? So it allowed me to coach soccer or go to a convalescent home, things that I otherwise wouldn't have thought about, right? And so what's interesting to me is then, it's a Catholic school, right? And so there's obviously going to be elements of the religion that are founded in justice, right? This orientation of service, right? And so this act of service was planted probably with my parents and then the seeds grew. But in terms of work that I do now, I think about like, I wanted to provide an education for our students in New Orleans or my school in Cleveland with those same opportunities, right? So like John and Amanda and myself had our opportunity to get academics, right? Like 6 or 7 courses. Right, a day, but there were also ample opportunities for extracurriculars and clubs that allowed you to connect with other folks, right? Like the level of confidence that you can grow into, right? And so exist, right? And so I think going to a small school that allowed for that to happen, my fundamental 4 years of high school is what I want to transform the lives of children in New Orleans, knowing those children experience a significant more level of trauma, right? Like adverse effects growing up in poverty, exposure to crime, like, you know, my students came from communities that like in the late 90s and early 2000s, John at St. Mary's and Amanda at UCSD and maybe me at Berkeley, we might be bumping and grinding to back that ass up from Juvenile, right? But like the projects that Juvenile's from and No Limit, like that's where my kids are from, right? Like, so I have like, you know, like all these like neighborhoods that rappers are talking about in the late 90s and early 2000s that I would sing about, like that has become part of my community, right? And I think about like, it was not a hard flex. It was a sacrifice my parents made to send me from Bay Farm to St. Joe's. But I think about like when I was knocking on doors in housing developments, Iberville, right, Magnolia Projects. When I was knocking on doors with my bushy hair, like a dress shirt, and I'm talking about college, folks are like, "What?" I was selling our students on this idea like, y'all deserve more. The system is inequitable. We're going to try our hardest to give you everything that you need to be able to support your child. And we will take on the triangle, right? So students, families, the staff, and then the parent, the student themselves, right? And so we built out a band. We built out a marching band. We built out speech. We built out multiple sports, right? So I wasn't the strongest athlete growing up, but I think there's so much to learn in teams, right? And so I'm hooting and hollering on the sidelines. And like, I think the few times that I got choked up in those 10 years had a lot to do with the losses that we took, right? Like on the field, because it's not because I don't want to teach our kids about sportsmanship, right? That was just another L that their life is already hard enough. Like I care about all kids, but I care about the students that went to our school. And so I think about the experiences that were given to me again by my family, my mom and dad, as well as my high school experience. And I wanted to provide that for folks, because if you took advantage of St. Joe's, here's what I'll tell you, right? Like if you took advantage of it, there was ample opportunity for you to grow and be successful. And then you can take those seeds that were planted and pivot to beyond that, right? Undergrad, grad school, the landscape of work. And I don't necessarily mean college, right? I have a bias for that, but there are plenty of people who are uber successful that came out of high school. That wasn't the path that they chose. But I would like to think it's because of the staff and the relationships they developed and the small school and this idea about justice, right? Like you're constant, like we took 8 semesters of religion, 6 of those 8 covered that, this idea about justice, right? Like do unto others as unto others as you would want done to you is one aspect, but this idea of like fighting for equal rights, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I bring that energy and passion from those 4 years and in talking and dialogue with people, but I would argue even with our coursework and that we got during high school.
Well, and it's interesting too. So John talked about how what was so important to him and what really meant the most to him in this was having that place where he felt he could go, right? Like John, athletics were a huge part of your life. And it almost seems like that part in your talking you took for granted, right? Like, of course, athletics, of course, the sports, of course, the team. Whereas for Niloy, it seemed like that was very impactful for you. And that's what you wanted to bring to these kids. You wanted to be sure that they had access to those same team building opportunities that you had, right? Like whether it was literally on a team or it was volunteering, the things that take you outside of yourself and force you to work with or work for someone else, right? You mentioned volunteering at a convalescent home, which is actually something I also did in high school. And so I understand how...
We have a lot in common. I mean,
I know, New Orleans.
We just met. We have a lot in common.
So you guys should also know, I also worked in New Orleans when I was in college and helped to establish a school there that's still thriving, which is really exciting. The Bard Early College School. So check it out. It's a great organization. I love Bard for Life. And so, but I think it's really interesting that you guys each took the pieces that seem to have meant the most to you. And I don't know if you're aware of that, like if that's something that you were consciously doing, like all 4 of you took the thing that as you were talking was like, it was so important to me to have a place I could go in the in-between. You know, Mr. Gerson, it was so important to you to like bring that openness and that home to your kids, right? Amanda, it was so important to you to have a place that you felt like everyone could gather and could be together and to form those bonds. And Niloy, it was so important to you to have something that was service in action, that was compassion in action, that was justice in action, whether it was on a team sport or theater or volunteering in your community.
One thing I was going to add, I didn't know that in 92 to 96. Like that was not what I was about, right? Like I actually like regret wasting some of my parents' tuition dollars for 4 years. I didn't work that hard. Like high school, a lot of things I could have taken advantage of. Like I think it was a struggle transitioning from school, not knowing a lot of people.
No, we're all teenagers, and teenagers are all assholes. Like
I don't want to come off wiser beyond my years because that didn't hit me until later. Like I definitely was not one of those people early on. One thing that I think is interesting because as I think back, and I know you're the interviewer, but I'd love for John to dabble into this. Is that I think one of the things about, like I was alluding to earlier, about John's ability to slide in and out of groups has a lot to do with sports, right?
Thank you. Okay, you are stealing my thunder right now.
I am. I'm sorry.
This is why Amanda's here, is to keep you guys in line, because she's got.
All right. Well, I think there's a reason why John was able to slide in and out of the groups and get so much love, and particularly playing sports, basketball, and baseball more than soccer, because when I think about diversity and just his ability from freshman year, like, man, a few words, but he let his game do the talking. So I'll back in, Lauren. That's sort of a question.
So we're back to talking about John's good game, which I'm sure was a story in high school. But you did say something about John that I would like to explore a little bit more when he talks about human side, which is his ability, you said, around consensus building, right? Yeah. And team building, right? Now you have you're a senior partner of human side, which it seems like I've done management and executive consulting for a number of years now, similar type events, right? We call it collaborative conversations, but that consensus building and being able to bring people together into a space and allow them to open up and work towards a common goal, right? Like that to me is like the two experiences that you've shared, which is sports, right? Having this team that you're palling around with and also working towards a specific goal, both individually in terms of improving your skill set, working on your time, getting in those practice hours, showing up, right? Mentally and physically for each of the games. But then also bringing people physically together, right? Taking them to Mr. Gerson's house. So how are you incorporating ideas of consensus building, community, and goal orientation in your work?
I'd like to answer both questions, Niloy's and Lauren's.
Do it.
Here's the truth. One, I think Niloy was much smarter in high school than he's given himself credit for. But two, there was a way that I'm lucky enough to grow up with wonderful parents and an incredible family. Mm-hmm. And I also didn't know, there was no like ability to test the validity of like the good things that like they would say nice things to me, but none of the world like would back that up. So I was always kind of confused about what was happening. And then I got into high school and for the first time in my life, it was like sports was the thing that gave me value, right? Like, oh wow, people are nice to me now. Like this is wild. And so there was a way that winning and losing felt like if I lose, then I'm on the outside again, right? There was a real cathartic thing. I didn't know any of this at the time, but this is like how it felt later.
Yeah.
Yes. And the way that to amplify the possibility of like still being liked is really what came down to was the people that I was with. And so it really became a way of like how I got really good at trying to like figure out what people needed. And I got really good at asking questions because if they needed me, then I have to talk about it. It was all imposter syndrome stuff, right? And then Kairos that Niloy mentioned, that was the first time that I was at a point when I was like, oh, wow, like we can have real conversations like this. I didn't know wait, what? And so there was a point where like I left high school being like, I may actually have value. And I may actually be able to have real conversations with people. And there was like an inkling just of like, don't really even talk about that too loud of like, but maybe I'm actually kind of smart. Like this was the experience that really was the germination of everything that happened from there. When going into rooms now, there's a way that like these highly developed defense mechanisms that like, you know, navigating high school is a crazy wild experience. They come in handy when you're talking with a group of, and I feel lucky enough to have worked with some of the populations that Niloy had. But like if you're walking into a room of some young kids who have been through some craziness, their barometer for like BS is real high. And so the only way that you can talk is authentically. That's the only way to even be heard, right? And adults, in many ways, we just have more finely developed defense mechanisms. But the ability to speak authentically to people, that still gets felt. There's a way that gets heard and felt differently. And so I feel like my whole job, whether it is with nonprofits or in colleges or in the corporate setting, is how can we create a space where people feel comfortable enough to be themselves, which really comes down to like, how do we make it so that people can have authentic conversations? And that is the piece that comes through. You make folks feel welcome, like Mr. Gerson did. You acknowledge people and you bring them into the fold, like Niloy just did. You like do all these I wish y'all knew Amanda in high school. Like she took care of so many people. Like it was like a friggin' walking like heart with arms and legs that also had a sunshiny smile. Like it was so like making people feel at ease in this almost effortless way. There's all these things that still show up that came from back in the day. I'm also feeling like, one, I feel like we should actually send this to St. Joe's. But two, and this is a little bit of a deviation, but if you'll indulge me, one of the things that I think is really special about our school was that we were small. We had all of these people from all over, like just diverse world, but it was a small community, right? We had 125 people in our graduating senior class, which was the largest graduating senior class they'd ever had at that point. It was eclipsed by the year after, but that's no big deal. And because of that, we got to know our teachers and our coaches and the people around us in a way that was different than just I used to talk about, right? Raise your hand if you remember 90% of what you learned in high school. Raise your hand if you worked 50. And like the numbers go down, and it's like, raise your hand if you know the name of one of your teachers who believed in you, right? And like it's 100% of people who get it. I can name off the top of my head, I can name 20 of our teachers from St. Joe's who like made an impact on who I am, teachers and coaches and different folk. And we at the St. Joe's community actually lost a teacher a couple days ago. Miss Judy Conflat passed away. And I just wanted to acknowledge her publicly because she touched all of our lives, and the fact that we know about it and are affected by it. And she was a force in education throughout Oakland. She went to St. Teresa's and ran the school there for many years after St. Joe's. But the fact that like I'm impacted it's just another testament to the community.
I don't know if this is going to be off subject or whatever, but along the way of being with kids, being with students, teaching, I taught in the inner city in Oakland at Roseville Junior High, and coaching, we had a lot of different experiences, but some of the kids we lost, and it just was so painful when you had kids that had a lot of talent. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of game. They were nice kids, and somehow, I guess, life got them, or they took them in a different direction, and then they're gone. And that tore me up. And I wonder if you guys experienced that too. It's probably a hard subject to talk about, but
I want to acknowledge the fact that Mike Austin, who was a St. Joe's basketball player for 2 years, also passed away. One of my former teammates. This has been quite a week over here. But yes, and I will pass this to Niloy because I know that he's been in this game a lot longer than I have. But there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it, and you don't walk that one off.
Yeah, I think it. I'm not sure this is something I thought about a lot when I was younger, but I'm constantly thinking about things that I or we, whatever team I'm part of, could have done better. And I mean, we had at our highest, we're a school with 550 students. At our fewest, we had like 450, right? Meaning when we were at full scale. And as proud as I am, our mission was we develop college-bound students for leadership and lifelong learning. So when we took over the Albert Wicker Literacy Academy, only 8% of students were passing the math exam and 20 were passing the reading exam. And at our height, we had like 72%, 79% passing the 8th grade math exam, much more rigorous with Common Core implementation. And then reading was like at 67, right? But to be honest, I wasn't prepared for like what we might have experienced freshman year, first day, like the preparedness our respective middle schools, right? Because there's a lot more to that than whether you can pass a state exam or not.
Right.
And so I think about like, what I'm obsessed with now is something that I wasn't obsessed with before. And that is a lot of around culture and upbringing, is this idea about mental health, right? And social and emotional learning, just like the holistic approach of making sure that you're in a space and place to be able to be your best self. And I think if Amanda, who was a very talented dancer, cheerleader, if she broke her arm and she had a cast on, we would all know. If John from soccer had cut his eye or the ball had happened and he had a Band-Aid, he would have known, right? If I was playing volleyball and I sprained my wrist and I had to, we would know, but we don't actually know what people are experiencing. And maybe the 5 of us, the 6 of us on this call and others that are watching and just in general, like are now at a place to talk about that, like therapy, right? Like it went from brick and mortar to now people are doing it remotely in light of COVID-19. And so there are many students that I think that we could prepare in terms of catching up deficiencies around reading and math and writing, right? putting them in an environment for them to be successful. But when you've experienced poverty at a level that is like unbeknownst to most people, and then on top of that, been exposed to violence, right, or abuse. And then, and this is not every single person, just to be clear, but these adverse childhood effects or experience that trauma. And then you're in a building and the idea is, all right, we're going to go extended day, extended year. You're going to be in school from 8 to 5. Like no matter what you do at night from 5 to 11 to try to keep kids busy, things are going to happen, right? And so I think that there are a few students that we lost along the way that have been incarcerated, right? And so when I think back to like where they were in 8, 7, 6, 5th, 4, what could we have done? We actually created a unique high school placement program. So some of our students were going to like Newman, where the Mannings went and Odell Beckham went, right? Like we got students that got a full ride to go to those schools. We also made sure that the students who were going to struggle were still going to get the nurturing that they needed at a smaller school. But along the way, we lost students, right? And I think about what more we could have done. And so coming out of most recently in my work, I've been obsessed with making sure that as schools are opening up after being closed since the middle of March or early March, the one thing I want to make sure that we provide all educators in the state of Texas is a trauma-informed training, right?
Yeah.
For what you might have experienced, no matter where you are, right? Being stuck for 5 months. And then on top of that, what your students might have experienced, whether you're white, Black, Latino, Middle Eastern, Asian, or middle income, high income, low income, right? Because some of this during the pandemic is going to be here. And then in light of what we just experienced with George Floyd's murder and other African-American Black folks dying at the hands of police and other folks, and just like the atrocities that happened there. And then on top of that, all of the protests and looting. So it's just a lot that we've absorbed in 2020. And so hopeful, fingers crossed, that by the time schools resume, whether it's distance learning or it's brick and mortar, that we're going to see some of that and being able to do that. So it doesn't take my response to the original question.
Hold on, Niloy, we're losing you. Hold on a sec. Can you repeat that?
Oh, I was saying like, so I have laser like.
Did you mute yourself?
No?
Niloy, muted. It is 2020.
No, I didn't. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. I was saying I have laser-like focus in terms of like losing the boots to the ground community feel and thinking 30,000 feet in the sky. Something that is now on my plate of work or work stream is to get out trauma-informed training online for every educator in the state of Texas and provide 100,000 students, which is only like 1.85% of our student body, 5 sessions of telecounseling, right? So like folks that are rural and remote who can't get the brick and mortar experience of getting a counselor. So I think we started doing a lot of that in New Orleans, right? And I think I just wish I doubled down on that more and we're able to Mr. Gerson's anecdote, like provide more for the students who needed it, right? The differentiated level of support, particularly around counseling to say, hey, like you're struggling. So I think I would always, like when I talk about my experience at schools, I would talk about when our teams took a loss, whether the boys or the girls, that 4 minutes when like between like knowing that you've lost and then the shaking of hands was touch and go so many times, right? I didn't know what was going to happen. My cortisol level was released because like we were trying so hard to teach those skills through social and emotional learning. And for my proxy of like the 30 plus middle schools, the schools who had the more challenging student bodies would see those students escalate during that time, right? Like to be able to deal with that. And so if I could go back and do it all over again, and I'd say for moving forward in education, we have to do a better job of providing and promoting mental health services in schools as not an add-on, but as a holistic build out in terms of getting to a place where everyone is comfortable to be at their best.
I love that everyone's comfortable to be at their best. I think it really resonates with what John was saying too about authenticity and vulnerability, right? Like you're coming at it one from, Niloy, much more from a structural and institutional perspective, right? How do we create an emotionally safe place or provide the mental health tools for students who maybe don't have that so that they can be at their best, right? So that they can get to that next level, so that they can be receptive. And John, you talking about how if you don't have honesty, authenticity, vulnerability, the things that foster interpersonal emotional safety, right? When someone is being authentic with you, you have that safety and confidence to be able to open up, both to receive what they're saying and also to share, right? Which is how we learn and grow. That's how we develop new neural pathways, whether it's new memories with someone, new bonded relationships, or it's Common Core math, right? whatever those things that we're building in our brains, especially before we've developed that prefrontal cortex, right? Anyone under the age of 25, right? Once we get that prefrontal cortex, then we have all of our defense mechanisms set up, and we're not as receptive to things like intimacy and vulnerability, right? It's more of a maze to get through. I think it's interesting that you are both, again, sort of taking the framework of what you learned when you were in that place at those ages, right? And how foundational the community that you grew up in, that you were formed in, and how it formed you. And I love how you're using that to create that same opportunity that seemed to have positively shaped you in the world. And that you're doing it for the generation that's coming up, right? That you're actively working right now with people, with kids, with these young humans, so that they can be the next ones to come up behind you, right? And continue to create that chain. This week has been hard for everybody, right? It's been emotional. Many of us grew up in the 90s. That seemed like a bastion of hope, right? And we have to confront realities about the world that we live in, because we didn't have complete control over creating it. And some of the stories and some of the narratives and some of the truths that we were told might have not been true everywhere. And I love meeting the four of you and being able to see the ways that you're trying to tell a better story and to create a better path and to create the narratives that this generation of kids can walk up into, whether it's by giving them the opportunities or giving them the tools to be able to be the people that we all want in the world. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. If you want to have a chance to connect with Niloy or John, obviously the links are provided, but go ahead and check out Peace Project or Human Side to connect with John. I know Niloy is still really proud of the work that he did do in New Orleans, but you can follow him now at the Texas Education Agency and be able to see some of the really compelling work that he's doing there at an institutional level to bring what he learned in New Orleans there on a larger scale.
Lauren, do you have time? Can I show you some pictures?
All the time is yours, man. Take it.
The Gerson's house. I don't.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Well, let me back up real quick, because I think the anecdotes that John gave. So I think this makes so much sense. I'm super excited. Like, I haven't have not been to Bella Vista, but in listening to some of the other shows, and particularly this week, and I think that the anecdote that John gave around how Amanda could make people feel at home really resonates with me, because I think that it wasn't until sophomore year that I became friends with Amanda, but I think high school in the beginning was a struggle for me, right? Like I'm the same way that I was since I came out of my mother's womb, right? Hasn't changed, right? So like, you know, I don't think that if you were to like ask John if there was a Zoom back then and Amanda, the 92 conversation would be the same thing as 2020, right? Like, right. Real. But I'm like a fine wine. Those of you that drink, right? The longer you're going to have more affinity for Niloy. So I'd say that, you know, one of the things that I think about, like, it's interesting, right? So John, you know, I don't know if folks caught that, but John talked about like some of the imposter syndrome or vulnerabilities that he didn't find out till Kairos, right?
Yeah.
And I do remember people saying John having changed after Kairos, which is interesting to me. But now that when you said that, triggered that. But I remember just having a conversation in one of my classes with Amanda, and Amanda just like inviting me to hang out like after school and like walking back from St. Joe's, and sort of that was the catalyst of our friendship. Super simple, right? Like, even though we'd been in school for like, I think probably 3 semesters at that point, like I hadn't been friends with her and connected with her. And Amanda was the epicenter of a lot of our, particularly like just in general, super social, welcoming, but but Amanda sort of was a door gatekeeper, right? So if she's not letting you in, you can't get in. But once you're in, right? It's like it's like Vegas. You got bottle service, right? But you got to know where to get in. So I benefited a lot, man. I mean, I really thank Amanda and the Gersons for really making me feel at home. That was the first time, probably the spring semester of 94, where I was like, this is a good group, a core group of people. And at the essence of that, in the heart of that was Amanda. So it's interesting to me because now, in light of what's gone on, we talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusiveness. We talk about all those pieces, but we were doing some of those things naturally without necessarily knowing, right? And I think Amanda had a lot to do with it. One of the most traumatic things that have happened to me and my family was like 10 days after I graduated high school, my mom was in a terrible car accident. She was in a coma for 5 weeks in intensive care for 3 months. And this is like right before Amanda leaves for UCSD. Took the time to babysit my little sisters twice, like my 2 little sisters, just things like that to me that still touch me almost 24 years later. And so I'm super thankful and grateful for the friendship that I've had with you and the family for years. And even after high school, like the kickbacks that Amanda would have, always at the essence of bringing people together, right? And so I just wanted to highlight that in light of this notion of community for folks that are tuning in and watching later to be like, well, what does that mean? Is that though I'm not at Bella Vista and I haven't seen it in San Diego, I think the core of who Amanda is and the family that she grew up in has been in the anecdote that John shared and hopefully the ones that I just shared. It just makes so much sense for that to be the theme. But can I share my screen?
Please, we want to see it.
Amanda has not aged. Let me see here. I think you disabled it. So,
there.
I had a couple
Although
pictures.
I don't know if I should have just given you permission. What are you sharing?
Here we go.
No, this is just
Now it's on.
So this is from the prom and
Oh my God.
take a look at that. Look at Amanda. If you can zoom in, Amanda looks identical to what she did 25 years ago. Right? There was Jenny Olson, your guest from Monday. Yeah. Let me see. I'm gonna share another one that I have. Hold on one second. That I picked up for the following year.
Niloy comes prepared.
Always has.
Niloy, did you have another date the next year?
Yeah, I asked this time. So I was telling the story of I didn't have enough game to ask Jennifer Olson. I had to have a proxy. So when I saw her, I was like, oh man, like I did not have enough game at the time to actually ask her. So I believe I had someone ask her on my behalf, which is super embarrassing. The game has improved significantly in 20. Look at this one. This is
love it.
24 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Amanda, I think you still have that dress.
I do. It's hanging in my closet.
And then I got one more for you. Hold on one second.
Your date was a hell of a baseball player. Yes, he's a great guy.
Yeah.
We were going to do a show like on Amanda's ex-boyfriend.
This is a picture of me and Amanda from 96 grad night. I think, John, you were baseball playoffs. You're probably NCS baseball playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
We had
those are some
like ginseng packets that night. Ooh.
that was yeah, those are some fond memories. So
I love you guys. Thank you for coming on. This has been I think there's a reason somehow with everything that's going down. I think we all needed it this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about you.
Yeah.
Oh. I love you. We've hit the hour. We're going to go off camera, but I hope that we stick around for a little post chat. So okay. I love you guys. Thank you, everyone. Bella VTV. This is going on to YouTube, Bella VTV. You can like, you could subscribe. My 11-year-old who was walking back and forth is a little jealous because now Mom's apparently a YouTuber. And so is Papa. So thank you guys again so much. Keep following the journeys of Bella VTV and of everyone who comes on. And we love, Lauren, that you do this every week. This is 100% volunteer work. So this is how we're giving back during COVID and during now a time of civil unrest. Thank you guys. I love you. You guys stay on and we're just going to toggle off. All right.